something a little weird. Bear with me, please. I'll explain later. So weird. I want to tell you guys a story about astronauts. It's January 28th, 1986, and we're in southern Florida, Cape Canaveral. It's a very cold day. Clear skies, though. And so these 7 astronauts are getting ready to go to space. They board the Space Shuttle Challenger. And then at 11:39, after a couple of hours of checks and double checks, triple checks, you hear that famous countdown.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6. We have main engine start. 4, 3, 2, 1. And liftoff. Liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower.
So I've already told you that that's the Challenger. So you may know already that a little over a minute after that, the Challenger exploded in front of the cameras, in front of a worldwide audience. And the question is why? Does anybody know? Yeah?
One of the O-rings had frozen over the night, so it cracked, and then the booster went boom, and then everything exploded.
Exactly. Exactly. Not true at all, but exactly. What happened was that an O-ring, which is a metal, a rubber gasket that holds the seal between adjacent parts of a gas or fuel tank, made of rubber, failed, and so that day it was so cold for southern Florida, as you can see in this picture. That's much colder than usual in southern Florida. And when it freezes, rubber loses its pliability. And so that O-ring lost its pliability, like you said, and it didn't make the seal properly. And so what you get is a leak of fuel, and that leak of fuel catches on fire and it makes a plume, and slowly that plume grows until the entire rocket full of fuel exploded. And that's why the Challenger exploded. So was it a mechanical failure? Yes. But was it an unforeseeable accident? And the answer to that is no. And I want to convince you guys, and the reason I'm telling you this story is that the reason why the Challenger exploded is not really a mechanical reason, but rather a more prosaic reason. And it is that the Challenger exploded because somebody wasn't good enough at giving a presentation. It was an error in public speaking. And you're like, what? And I'm like, so let me explain that. The previous night, the company that made those O-rings was called Morton Thiokol Incorporated. And the previous night, that company called NASA up. And they said, we looked at the weather. It looks bad. We want you guys to stop the launch. And they made a little presentation to convince NASA to stop the launch. They predicted it. And so I'm going to show you the slides, the two key slides from that presentation. Excuse me. It's totally true about the boundaries. I ate one. Okay. So I'm going to show you the two key slides from that presentation. This is the first one. Morton Thiokol said, okay, we have rockets and we have previous launches that we've had, and we've recovered the rockets from those previous launches and looked at the O-rings. So we're going to draw a little rocket for each launch, and then this is the temperature at which that rocket was launched, And then we're going to put different little hatchings depending on like each O-ring, whether we found damage on it or not. Right? And so this is the money shot, this one. And they're like, right? Right? This is the slide that should convince you to stop the launch. And notice, first of all, that the key is gone. You don't know what this kind of hatching is, you don't know what that means anymore. For some incredible reason, they ordered this not by temperature, which is what they care about, but rather chronologically. So this is like all of the launches from the past. And then after showing this slide, they said, you guys should postpone the launch. And NASA said, yeah, talk to the hand. And they went on. There was pressure on NASA to keep going. And so they went ahead because they didn't believe the people at Morgan Firecall. And the result was this. And just to further prove to you that not only was this an error in public speaking, but it could have definitely been helped by better public speaking. I'm going to show you what happened when Edward Tufte, this guy, who's a professor of statistics at Yale and very interested in learning how to present data to other people. He said to himself, what if I took the same data that was available in 1986, and I just presented it better? Could I come up with something more compelling than that slide that I just showed? And this is what he came up with. On the x-axis, there's the temperature at the time of launch for each of those launches. Each of these dots is a particular launch. And then on the y-axis, you have one measure which includes all of those hatchings. So it's just one measure of total O-ring damage. And so these are all of the launches in the past. And if you follow this trend, literally off the chart, over here is the range of forecasted temperatures for that day. So I'm going to let that sink in. Because imagine what would have happened if you had shown that slide and you had told NASA to postpone. Who knows what they would have said. But I will bet you a quarter that lives would have been saved. So what I'm saying, yes, I am saying it, is that lives depend on how well you present. Literally, in this case. And the people who made this presentation, they had degrees like aerospace engineering. They were not like, they were sitting in classes like this and going like, I don't need this wishy-washy stuff. And then it turned out that it was very important to them. Like obviously, for you, most likely, it's not going to be a matter of life and death. But for you, it is going to be the difference between getting a venture capitalist to fund your company or not. It is going to be the difference between getting a raise or not, or getting promoted or not. So it's very important. I deeply believe in what I'm telling you guys here. I really want to convince you that I do this not for the pleasure of hearing my own voice, but because I think it's very important for you all to care deeply about your presentations. That's the point of that story. So if it's important to become a good presenter, how do I become a good presenter? And I want to convince you guys that it's a relatively simple thing to do. All you have to do is follow 3 little rules, 3 guidelines, I guess. And they're the following. The first one is you should listen to other people's presentations. Because you guys are constantly bombarded by presentations in all kinds of classes. And there are professors that you like, and there are professors that you don't like, and there are classes that you like and classes that you don't like, and why? You should be thinking, not just generally, I hate that class, but why do you dislike it? Is it because the slides are crap? Is it because the professor is like doing the rocker and it makes you kind of upset in some subconscious level? You should be learning from other people's mistakes when they present to you. So listen to other presentations. And then prepare your own presentations with those ideas in mind. And prepare, when I say prepare, I mean prepare a lot. A good rule of thumb is that you should prepare an hour for every minute you speak. And if I know that it's a lot, I know. But it is worth it. And you'll be surprised by how much better your presentations are. definitely worth it. And then you give your presentation after getting the best ideas you can from other people and preparing a lot, and then you make mistakes and you screw up. And I did one section previous to this one, and I'll try to fix it this time. You learn from your mistakes. There's no excuse for making the same mistake twice. Okay. So if you repeat that, you're done. All you have to do is listen to other people's presentations, carefully thinking not only about the information that they're transferring, because that's what you guys are here for, to learn, but also how they give you the presentation, how they're putting their points across. And then when you do that, you prepare your presentations a lot, and then you never make the same mistake twice. If you do that, if you just follow that, I'm done. That's it. That is it for my presentation. You can close your notebooks if you want. It's done. Like, those are the things that I want you to remember. Nothing else. And I'll tell you a story that I told the previous section, which worries me deeply. I give this presentation. I've given this presentation a lot of times, and I got an email from someone a couple of years ago asking me if I could come give this presentation to their section. They said, I went to this presentation. I think you're the right person. I went, and it was a great presentation about how to give presentations and something to do like the challenge. I'm like, fuck. Right? That's what you remember about my presentation? Really? When what I want you to remember is that you should be thinking about other presentations, learning how to do them, learning from your mistakes. But apparently, the challenger is what comes through. And unfortunately, I just had that epiphany today, so I haven't changed it. Probably you will think that this presentation, hopefully you won't think that this presentation is about the challenge. Okay? That's the important stuff. So that's it. That being said, I want to talk to you guys about how to speak in general for a while, and then PowerPoint tips in particular for a while. And so this presentation is going to be about an hour long, and I won't take you past that, I promise. Okay. By the way, feel free to stop me at any time with questions you may have. It makes it a lot more fun for me, and I think more useful to you. So let's begin with speaking in general. I'm a biologist, and as a biologist, I like experiments. So I'm going to do a little experiment with you guys. The experiment is the following. I'm going to flash on the screen a white square, and it's just going to flash in and out for a fraction of a second, and there are going to be black dots on the square. And what I want you guys to tell me is how many black spots you see. Okay? You ready? Yes, that was quiet. Ready? Three. Four.
Seven.
I don't know.
Seven apparently.
Last?
11.
Eight.
Oh, more like
How can I only count that?
So that was 7 and 10 at the end.
Oh,
And it turns out that, I mean, this experiment is amazing, I think, because it never fails. Like, I've given it a million times and it just never fails. If I show you 6 or fewer spots, you're going to get it 100% of the time. But if I show you 7 or more, like you did, things start degrading. It's no longer 100% of the time. And this is not just about your eyes. I can do the same thing with your taste buds by trying to order degrees of sweetness, or with your ears, with tones, unless you are you're special and you have perfect pitch. If I give you 7 or fewer, or 6 or fewer tones, you can order them no problem. 7 or more, you start forgetting. You start being unable to do the ordering. And so it's not about your senses. It's not about your eyes or how fast you can see. It's about your mind. And so the reason I'm telling you all of this is because this is a point about your short-term memory. This comes from a paper that is my favorite title in a scientific paper ever. The magical number 7 plus or minus 2. And what this guy said is, what he showed is that when you give people 7 or more objects to remember, their mind just cannot take it. Their short-term memory cannot take it. And in fact, it's not as simple as that. Newer research has shown that when I show you this image, which is the 7 points, you actually don't just count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 individually, but you do something kind of like, the first thing you do is you like group them, like that's one group, that's another, this is 4, that's 3. And so it's more like the magical number 4 in short-term memory. So what I'm telling you is that your short-term memory, your audience's short-term memory, really can hold only 3 things, if you want to be sure. This is where having 3 main points comes from. The idea that you can say more things than 3 and that your audience will remember it, not going to happen. Just not going to happen. And this is very important for you guys to remember, especially because you're going to work on your presentations a lot and you're going to have a lot to say. And so you're going to say more than 3 things. You're going to want to say more than 3 things. But make sure that you control which 3 things your audience remember. Because they can remember anything. They can remember the freaking challenger. When they have to remember that you should listen to other people's presentations, mindful. Prepare your own presentation and then never make the same mistake twice. Okay? So when you take your papers and you make them into a presentation, make sure that you control what the points are. And don't delude yourself. This is a great way to cut things out of your presentation when your presentation is too long. What are the 3 things that you want to remember, that you want your audience to remember? Anything else you can cut. And so while we're at the subject of how to turn your paper into a presentation, let me show you this. This is a sentence that is a little over the top, but could very well appear in one of your papers. Right? It is of the utmost importance to speak in a manner that facilitates understanding. And that bothers me because you should not be speaking like that. No one should speak like that. First of all, because it's arrogant and boring and pompous. And second, because your audience is not going to be able to understand you properly. Your audience will understand you properly when you say something like this. It's very important to speak in a way that's easily understood. So let me show you the difference between those 2 things. The first one is, when you say this, you're using contractions as opposed to that. In your regular speech, you use contractions. But for some reason, people tend to stand up here and think that they have to speak in prose. And when you do that, people are not used to listening to prose. So they have a hard time processing what you're saying. When you speak like this, it's easier for people to understand what you're saying. Don't speak like a Roman. Don't speak like Shakespearean. The second is, when you speak like this, you actually end up having handles for your voice. So when you say this, if you listen, it's very monotone. It is of the utmost importance to speak in a manner that facilitates understanding. That's part of the reason why presentations tend to drone on in the same voice. Whereas here, you have these handles that tell you it's very important to speak in a way that's easily understood. So that very is a word that is easily emphasized, that you know how to emphasize normally. And so that when you speak that sentence out loud, it actually gives your voice the up and downs, the melody that you needed for other people not to get bored with the way you're talking. Yeah. And then finally, facility. Who says facility? No one says facility. No one speaks like that. So I'll share with you a little story about this that I find fascinating. This guy, his name is Dan Oppenheimer. He was a grad student here at Stanford, actually, in the psychology department, I think. And he wrote this paper that's beautifully titled again, Consequences of Erudite Vernacular, Utilized Irrespective of Necessity. In other words, problems with using long words in English. And in this research, what he did was he took dissertations from the library here, from grad school, people who had written it. And then he took one paragraph of that and he took something like this. And he did what any person who's like trying to sound smarter would do. Just like take that and you go to the thesaurus, right? And then you go like, okay, not thesis, dissertation. and not show, demonstrate. And then you turn the paragraph like this. And so now you have a simple version and a complex version with longer words. And now you give it to people to measure what they think of this paragraph in the simple version and the complex version. The bottom line is this. This is the simple text, this is the complex text. This is what people thought about it. And what I want you guys to think first, though, is what do you think this is? Maybe comprehension, like how easy it is to comprehend. This is a little harder. Maybe this is how much you like the text. When in fact, the reality of that paper is, this is how intelligent you think the person who wrote it is. Right? Longer words, I think you're kind of dumb, because you're using longer words just for the sake of doing it. Right? So when you think that you need to use jargon and you need to use fancy words, think of this, please. Okay. And while we're at the subject of speaking in a manner that people understand, I don't want you to go as far as this.
In case you hadn't realized, it has somehow become uncool to sound like you know what you're talking about, or believe strongly in what you're, like, saying. Invisible question marks and parenthetical you knows and you know what I'm saying have been attaching themselves to the ends of our sentences, even when those sentences aren't, like, questions. Declarative sentences, so called because they used to, like, you know, declare things to be true, okay? As opposed to other things that are, like, totally, you know, not. They've been infected by this tragically cool and totally hip interrogative tone. As if I'm saying, don't think I'm a nerd just because I've, like, noticed this, okay? I have nothing personally invested in my own opinions. I'm just, like, inviting you to join me on the bandwagon of my own uncertainty.
That's Taylor Mali. He's a teacher and a spoken word artist, and he's fantastic, and you should see all his videos. They're all amazing. So I've just told you, speak like a human being, but don't speak like an alien. And that's a difficult thing for me to say to you, because essentially what I'm telling you is, like, find the happy medium. This is hard because it's not a simple guideline that you can follow. But it is true that you have to do this. In order to figure out whether or not you're speaking in a way that other people relate to, you really have to ultimately videotape yourself and look at yourself. Because when you sit down after your presentation, the one next to you is going to go like, yeah, that's a good job. It's always going to be the case. No one's really going to critique you in the way that you need to be critiqued. So you need to see yourself. I'll tell you a story. I have a friend that said all the time, and she knew that she said a lot. But then she videotaped herself, and we were in a class like this where we were learning how to give presentations. So she videotaped herself and immediately went to the back to watch her videotape. And then she came back pale. I had no idea. No idea. It's embarrassing. So you need to do that. And to do that, you really have to videotape yourself. And it's a good idea. You have the resources of the OCT's office, right? That you
And I've put up everything that they've already done.
Okay.
Except for the student choice presentations, which I'll do tonight.
Right. So this is an important thing. I just tried this thing with the Superman pose at the beginning, just today for the first time. And the reason I'm doing it is because of a study by a woman named Amy Cuddy. She has a TED Talk up online that you can see. And the gist of her TED Talk is that she did an experiment where she told people to either stand in a very powerful pose, like in one of these expansive poses, or in a very submissive pose, where you close yourself up, you are making yourself small. And then she asked them to do that for 2 minutes before an interview. So if you do that, the change in your hormone levels is the following. The testosterone change, which is a measure of your dominance, goes up if you're doing the expansive pose. And it goes down if you're doing the submissive pose. And the stress hormone, cortisol, does the opposite. So now, not only do you feel more dominant, are you less stressed out, but also, this is the kicker, is that after that pose, she asked them to go in and have a job interview. And then she asked the interviewers, who would you hire? And they would hire the people who did the power pose. So this makes a huge difference, actually. And it makes a huge difference to you. So I get the benefit of doing it here in front of you because it's an example that I'm showing. But I really actually recommend, if you have a presentation to give, feeling nervous, there are a lot of people who feel very nervous about giving presentations. Go get in a bathroom stall. Do power pose for a while. This is 2 minutes. I'm serious.
And I just realized the gender implications, right? Men are standing in front of urinals doing a power pose, and women are all clenched up. This
I know.
explains-
Bro, what are you doing? I'm power
explains
posing, man.
everything.
I have to pee.
Yeah. Well, women can do Wonder Woman. This study was originally made by 2 women. First author and last author are women. You can do Wonder Woman, not Superman. Okay. So in general, when you speak to people, make sure that you're facing the audience. Make sure that you are making eye contact with people. Make sure that they know that this is me talking to you, not some disembodied voice coming at you from a speaker that you can ignore, because no one listens to the disembodied speaker voice. And you can also change the volume of your voice and the pace that you talk to emphasize points, which is very rarely done. Only poets really know how to do it. I don't, as you can see. Okay, the last thing that I want to tell you about speaking in general is to respect your audience. Every minute you stand in front of your audience is a collective 10 or 20 or 50 minutes of the audience's time. So while it may seem like you're the important one standing up, actually, the important thing is the audience. So don't think, again, what do I want to say, but what does the audience need to hear? There's another key way to cut things from your presentation. Am I putting this in the presentation because I think it's cool and I want to say it? Or am I putting this into a presentation because the audience needs to listen to it? They need to understand that this is a key part. It's very important. Respect your audience. Respect your audience by doing things that save time, like showing multimedia embedded in your presentation, like I've shown you here. It's very easy to learn how to do that. All you do is you go to YouTube and you type in how to download YouTube videos, and you can embed them into your presentation. It's very easy. And also, most important probably about this part, be respectful of your audience's time. If you tell them that your presentation is going to be an hour or 10 minutes, it has to be that long. It has to be that long, period. And the way you do this, I'll show you in a second. But just to emphasize the importance of it, I'll tell you a little story about an experiment that Robert Sapolsky did. Robert Sapolsky is a professor here in the biology department. And he did this experiment that's horrible, so forgive me, but he took a rat and he in a cage, and for no reason, for a period of 6 months, I think 6 months, for no reason, randomly, he just gave it an electric shock. So the rat is like just walking around getting electric shocks for no reason. And then he changed the experiment. He took another rat and he did exactly the same thing, same number of shocks, same intensity, same duration, everything. Except this rat got a little light a couple of seconds beforehand to tell it that it was coming. It's just like it can breathe. And the first rat gets an ulcer, right? It's a stress-induced ulcer. Nothing new about that. The second rat does not get an ulcer. And the weird thing about that, or the reason that Sapolsky thinks that is that that second rat, even though it's getting the same pain, the same abuse, it actually feels more empowered in its environment. It feels like it has control. It's called predictive information, meaning that the rat kind of knows what's coming. So when The reason I'm telling you this is that when you give presentations and you're like standing here, and people think that this is your last slide, because you've gone over already, and you click and it's not your last slide, you're, in a very real sense, giving them an ulcer.
Remember how many presentations I'm
Don't
watching.
give ulcers to your audience. Nice. And there's a good way to do that. I know that I've been speaking for exactly 30 minutes and 24 seconds because my screen does not look like that. My screen right now on the computer looks like this. Obviously, these screenshots are these numbers are wrong, but both PowerPoint and Keynote, which this is, allow you to put this up as your presenter notes so that you have how long you've been talking, what the time is, your current slide, and your next slide. Beautiful thing about having your next slide is that you don't click and go like, I forgot that that's where I was going. Like, stop. I'm not going to tell you about what I told you I was going to tell you about. Stop. Like, let's do this again. Nothing like that. So you can have a flow to your presentation. Okay. This is what your audience attention looks like in any presentation. And right now we're about there. In the previous one, there was actually a girl literally yawning as I put this slide up. But you're not going to change it. This is reality. This is not because you guys are mean. If you're a great presenter, this goes a little up. If you're a terrible presenter, this goes a little down. But this is life. And what you can learn from this is a couple of things. First of all, this is where people pay attention, at the beginning and at the end. So that's where the important stuff is. You tell them your 3 main points at the beginning and at the end, and you leave the respect thing and the audience thing in the middle. Yeah? And then the second thing is like, how come they can predict the end? And obviously it's because you're giving them some cues, either you're running out of time, or you're saying things like in summary, or you're showing a conclusion slide, and so people perk up and they go like, okay, might as well pay attention to that. Right? So you can take advantage of that by doing things like in the middle of your presentation. If you have a long presentation like this one, for example, you can say, okay, in conclusion to this part of my talk, and then you give the conclusion. And that way you give verbal cues to your audience that lets them know, okay, I'm going to summarize for you because I know that it's long and you're going to be drifting off a little bit. So this is the important stuff. So in summary to my part of the talk, these are the things that I just showed you. You should have 3 main points. You should speak like a human being, find that happy medium. And then you should respect your audience. Respect your audience a lot. Think about them and not you when you're giving presentations. Okay. That's all I have to say about speaking in general. Does anybody have any questions? Okay. So now I'll move on to PowerPoint. And PowerPoint is a very tricky subject, but of all the things that I may tell you, this is probably the most important thing. This is the rule. PowerPoint should show visual aids for your audience. Each one of those words is important. What I mean by that is if it's just an aid for your audience and it's not visual, it shouldn't be up on the screen. Text you can say. You don't need to put up text over here because you can say it. It needs to be something that's visual. Second, it needs to help. Don't put things up for no reason because you think that there just should be something up right now while I'm talking. And so in relation to that, it's important to know that when you hit the B key on your keyboard, it blacks out the screen. I'm pretty sure W will white it out. Let's try that out. Yeah. So black and white, easy. You don't always have to have something showing up on the screen. Okay. And then it needs to be for your audience. It can't be for you, because if you're showing things that are for you, then you're just showing them your notes. Your notes should be your notes, and they should be up here. They should not be up there. So just make that your basic PowerPoint philosophy. Remember Edward Tufte? I was talking about Edward Tufte. I found this thing up on the web that I think is kind of valuable. Every time you make a PowerPoint, Edward Tufte kills a kitten. This was actually made because Edward Tufte hates PowerPoint, period. He doesn't want you to give out PowerPoints. He wants you to give out handouts for complicated reasons that I disagree with. But the important thing is I still kind of agree with this because I don't want you to give out this PowerPoint slide. Every time you give a PowerPoint presentation like this, I kill a kid. Okay? Because when you give a presentation like that, it's because you started like this. Right? You know this. You sit in front of your computer and you think, okay, I'm going to give a presentation, so I'm just going to fill it out from a template. And so this leads to slides like that. And this is a typical slide you would see, but why is this slide like this? Why is there a title? Because there has to be a title on every PowerPoint slide. I still don't, no one has ever been able to explain to me why. But everybody is religiously obsessed with the necessity for a title on PowerPoint slides. You don't have to have a title. This is a better slide, no? I can tell you that I'm going to talk to you about the structural basis of load bearing in bridges. And I can describe to you all the things that are happening here and how this illustrates a suspension bridge. Actually, that's a suspension bridge. So if you use PowerPoint, use it as a visual aid for your audience. You should use it to show striking things because that's the beauty of images and videos. You can show a very striking image like this monk immolating himself, or this woman in a Jewish settlement trying to hold off the Israeli army, or this man in 9/11. They're very powerful images. Do them justice. Or you can show videos like this one, which is one of my favorite YouTube videos of all time. This guy, his name is Noah Kalina, and he started in 2000 or so taking a picture of himself, the same deadpan expression staring right into the camera every day. And I think this video is beautiful, like a little creepy and profound and poetic, but it's just something that I want you guys to experience. Now, can you imagine that video, like over here with some bullet points and a title? Doesn't do it justice. Or this is my favorite scientific video at the moment. This is a zebrafish egg, and it's been labeled so that the nuclei are visible. And so first they divide, and then they stop dividing. And then they start moving around. There's a lot of stuff, and this is from the bottom of the dish. You can see all the cells are currently getting in a plastic board. Gastrulation is going to happen. It's going to be awesome. Then the central part of the axis of the embryo is going to be over here. So this is going to be the head. That's the tail. You can see the head start forming. The somites are going to be here, so you're going to see these things. This is why there's PowerPoint, so you can see videos like this, because you can't describe this video. Okay. So let me change pace a little bit and talk to you about how to approach giving a PowerPoint presentation. You should approach it in this way. You should think that it's not, I'm going to make a PowerPoint presentation. It's, I have a story to tell, and then maybe I'll use PowerPoint to tell that story. So that PowerPoint is your story. PowerPoint is subservient to your story, not the other way around. Because if you do the opposite, then this is what happens, which happens all the time. You start like this, which, by the way, is the complete wrong philosophy. When PowerPoint was made, it was made in, I think, the early 80s by Microsoft as a tool for business. And so what they had in mind is we're going to make some business software so that middle management can tell upper management what it's been doing. So I'm going to tell you my marketing strategy for a product, which has a picture over here, and here are the bullet points of what our marketing strategy is. There's a business mentality. Is that the way you want to give your presentation? Not necessarily. Maybe sometimes. But most of the time, no, especially at a university. So if you go like this, then that business mentality permeates your presentation. So that if you go through the exercise of saying, what if I, Esteban, had made this presentation like this? Then I would have done something like, okay, how to speak, my name is Esteban, I used to be at UPenn, I have some picture like that I found, like jokey joke. Then I'm gonna have an outline because there has to be an outline. And so this is the outline. And then the introduction is like the Space Shuttle Challenger, and then I'm going to talk speaking in general, these are the things, and then PowerPoint tips, and then conclusions are done. Right? That was super easy. It's part of the beauty of software like this, that it makes it so easy to do a shitty job. Yeah. Because you don't have to think about it. You just put up the template, and then you just fill in the template, and filling out the template is easy. But these are your notes. This is not your presentation. Please don't present like that. When you present, I want you guys to think for a little bit about your story and treat your presentation, your PowerPoint slide, as a blank canvas that can, like, maybe even interact with the audience separately from you. It can do anything. You can think about your presentation as something completely detached, outside the box, that you're doing that is not a template. Okay? So that's a very simple example, very out of the box, not particularly the best or the funniest thing you've ever seen. But I'm showing you that just to explain to you that the PowerPoint presentations that you're probably used to, most of them that you see, are predicated on the concept of business middle management presenting to upper management. And you should think about your presentations in a very specific way about how you want to tell them and how your story, think of it as a story. And then maybe I have some visual aids for that story. Maybe I don't even need PowerPoint for my presentation. But if you do use PowerPoint, don't do this. Like, what is that? Those transitions, like, can anybody give me a reason why those transitions are there?
If you're in the 5th grade.
That's a good one, because 5th graders are impressed by that, but your audience is not impressed by that. So don't do that, because the only reason you could possibly, as an adult, have for doing that is to go like, oh, this guy really knows how to work PowerPoint. It's a stupid reason, and there are legitimate times to use animation. But you should be able to give me a reason. If you can give me a reason for that, go crazy. So I've put a lot of animation here, maybe a little more than I would usually put in a presentation, just to give you examples of what I think is legitimate as animation. So I'll give you a couple of other examples. Let's say you're talking about anatomy and you want to focus in on the collarbone. So there's an animation called a swipe, which reveals things from one side to the other. So I could do this, because I'm blowing that thing up, right? So the reason this is legitimate is because, as opposed to just like it appearing or it being there in the first place, is because what it is doing, the animation, is physically representing what I want you mentally to do, right? To take this piece and expand it over here, yeah? So that's legitimate. This is some work that I did for my PhD. It doesn't matter what it is, but the gist of it is, I have these 2 points, they're in this order, this orientation, and they're in that orientation in the cell. And then I did a manipulation that changed the order of those points. And so you would expect them to be in that orientation in the cell. Turns out they're not. And that's surprising. That was surprising to us. And so the reason this is legitimate is because if I don't do it this way, if I show you the whole slide, the entire slide to begin with, then you know the conclusion. There is no storytelling to this slide. You see? Because you're going way faster than I am with your eyes. So I can't build up a little tension of what you're expecting to see and then release that tension by telling you, no, it's not it. What's going on? And so the other thing is, why put this all in one slide? Well, because I want you to be able to compare one to the other at the same time. So when you put many things on the same slide, be sure that there's a reason for putting the same things on the same slide and not separating them into separate slides. You have many pictures, you can put them one after another. You can cycle through slides like there's no tomorrow. There's 150 slides in this presentation. And I can cycle through them no problem in less than an hour. So there has to be a reason for things to be side by side. Another thing about PowerPoint is tables. Tables suck. Tables are really good, but they suck when you're presenting because no one can understand those numbers. No one can process them in their mind fast enough. I can tell you, this is a famous quartet called Anscombe's quartet. And the thing about it is that it's a set of X and Y positions where I can tell you that each of these 4 groups has the same mean, the same standard deviation, the same correlation coefficient, the same slope to the line, and the same intercept. They're the same, right? But if you plot them, they are not the same. And it is very easy to see that in one glance. So when you present quantitative data, please make sure to make it as visual as possible. But make all of the processing yourself so that your audience doesn't have to do all the legwork. And then this next slide represents a lot of the things that I hate, or many of the things that I hate about PowerPoint. And it's not going to work because usually I would point at it with a laser pointer. And this particular screen just doesn't show that. But I'm sure you've seen someone present kind of like this. Hello. I don't give a rat's ass about this presentation or the people attending, so I decided to just put up my notes on the slide. This way, no need to prepare my talk, because I'm awesome. It don't matter that I have to face away from the audience. The people in the back probably can't hear me now. It serves them right. I also have this habit of pointing to each word while I read. Pretty sure this audience enjoys it when I finger read it. And finally, I changed the color on this text for a reason known only to myself, and which I will not disclose. Who cares if this audience won't be able to read this against the inexplicably parchment background? I'm going to read it out loud for you. By this time, I hope I've told you enough that that is never going to come up in this. Please, never do this. I have literally seen tenured faculty from Harvard give presentations like this. And it's shocking. They must be way smarter than everybody else if they can get away with that. Okay, so if you're not going to do this, there are a few things to keep in mind about your slides. Your slides, for example, have margins. If you put things way too high or way too off to the side, then they get clipped. And then you're like, oh, I also, this is a true story. I went to a presentation for a postdoc here in the developmental biology department. And he said, oh, the key lane for this experiment is here, but it's cut off. That's right. You'll have to believe me that it's like that. So there are margins to your slides. And things on the bottom in rooms that are not as nice as this one are often not visible from the back. Small images are hard to see. Large images, much better. White text on a black background is good because it's easy to see. The converse is also good because it's easy to see. I tend to prefer the former. It's just a style issue. You can prefer this one. Some people prefer color. Because they prefer color, when Microsoft started selling its software, they decided we need a color option. In true Microsoft form, they decided we're going to do the best color option. What is the best color option? The one that has the most contrast. What is the most contrast? Yellow against a blue background. Right? You just made a face, and that's the face that I make about this thing. I'm sure, I'm sorry about this. But that's, I hate this, right? I think everybody agrees that this is ugly.
It's actually,
What?
It hurts my eyes.
it actually doesn't hurt as much as I thought it would. I was like, oh.
You know, that this is not the,
Yeah.
you've seen it, this is not exactly the colors, right? Because you've seen that combination. Have you not?
I have.
Yeah, I have.
Oh.
But this is okay.
Yeah.
So it's
This
bad.
is Keynote, so I had to reproduce it, but apparently it's coming out of Vogue, which is nice, because when I went to college and grad school, I saw this all the time. I saw very important and smart people show this. So if you like color, maybe not this, I would suggest something like this. This is much nicer. And there's a special thing that I'm doing here that any software will do. You can add shadowing to the text, and that actually makes it a lot easier to tell things apart, because you have this very dark against very light. And so I'll just show you so that you can see again. This is the flat text, and that's the text with shadow. It pops out a lot more. It's easier to read. Red is difficult to see. It projects poorly. And this is a very good projector, or a very good screen. Blue is very hard to see. The human eye is actually best at telling different shades of green apart, because green is right in the middle of the spectrum for our eyes. We can tell different shades of green from each other because we have 3 photoreceptors that are just bracketing green. So if you have a choice and you want to do things in different colors, try different shades of green. And that will work actually probably much better than the typical way of doing it, which I used to do, which was, I have this line in yellow, and I want to make another line that's clearly separate from this line. So I'll make it blue. And I have another one that I want to make different from these two. So I'll make it red. And so you end up with these very primary color schemes that are super jarring, like that PowerPoint scheme with blue and yellow. It's a lot easier when you do it with earthy tones to tell things apart. You can see it. Caps is very good at getting our attention, and bold lettering gets our attention. But it feels like we're being yelled at. So unless you want your audience to feel like you're being yelled at, don't do that. How many people have used? You guys are right.
Yeah, nothing.
This guy always uses caps.
I speak in caps.
Just wait till you see.
I just speak in caps.
Sure. Have you guys heard, do you know what a sans serif font is? Have you guys heard that you're supposed to use one versus the other in presentation? Which one?
One without
Yeah.
Sans serif, right? Do you know why? Or maybe I'll just tell you why. I've got it anyway. So the serifs are the little feet on the characters. And the reason they're there is because they make an imaginary line that allows you to trace this line easier when you're reading long passages and you're going from one to the next. So this makes it easier for you to read long passages and not lose your place. That's why serifs were invented. All novels that you've ever read are written in serif fonts. Your Kindle has a serif font. But these things blur the differences between characters. So even though this is more readable in long passages, this is more legible. It's easier to read, just spot read. And when you're doing a presentation, you want people to spot read, so you want to use a sans serif font. This is Arial, which is a sans serif font. And as you can see, this is a lot easier to read, just pieces of, than this, which is in Times New Roman. But Times New Roman does have those serifs that make people read lines. And with regards to font, I want you guys to give a second to think about what font you want to use. And I want to convince you to do that with a little experiment that they did at the New York Times, where they said, we're going to put out a passage in a web page, and that passage is going to be some statement, and then we're going to ask people if they believe the statement. And then all that we're going to change is different people are going to get different versions, the same statement, but in different fonts. And so we're going to see how much they agree with the different fonts. And this is what you get. Oh, I'm sorry, this is coming pixelated. Right. So there are fonts that are more believable. Remember, this is the same passage. The only difference is that if you put it in basketball, people go like, huh, yeah, I agree with that. And then if you put it in Comic Sans, they're like, nah, I'm not sure. And Comic Sans, by the way, is the single most hated font anywhere. Please don't do your presentations on Comic Sans. There are people who hate it. I used to use Comic Sans for a while. This is what Comic Sans looks like. And just to show you that there are people who are very serious who make this mistake. A couple of years ago, or last year, I think, they came out from CERN with the discovery that they had proved the existence of the Higgs boson. Right? It's arguably one of the biggest discoveries of the century. And this is one of the official slides for that. It's in Comic Sans. It's insane that these people do that. And there is an actual website that you can go to or refer other people to.
Yep.
ComicSansCriminals.com. Okay. So finally, I want to tell you one parting story that illustrates this point. I've been trying to tell you all of the reasons, the scientific reasons behind having 3 points, or behind using different shades of green, because I want you to know why you're doing something. You should be able to explain to yourself why you're making a decision in your presentations. Because sometimes that decision is not the correct decision. Sometimes you need to break the rules, and I'm not saying this facetiously or as a just put up a cliche there of being a rebel. You don't need to be a rebel. You need to understand why the rules are there so you can make them effective. And you can be even more effective when you break the rules properly. I'll give you this example. I took genetics here, and in my genetics class, one of the professors said, okay, in 2001, Bill Clinton and Francis Collins came out and said, told the world, we just sequenced the human genome. Like fist bumping. And they're so happy. We have the human genome. And people are like, holy crap, the human genome. Who knows what's coming? And then my professor went like, yeah, well there, this is the human genome. Now what? Like, how is this getting me any close to a cure for cancer? How is this like, giving me anti-gravity boots? Or how is this helpful at all? It's just a sequence. And so right now, what we're doing, what we've been doing since the human genome was sequenced, is going like, okay, that's a gene. It encodes for an enzyme, which does something, you don't know what, but it's a thing, right? It's a part, it's one. That is a thing. And then these are like sequences that like either turn on or off, or like do little things to it. And so that's what geneticists have been doing for the past 12 or 13 years in this century. And so the reason I'm showing you this story is because he broke the rules by putting up something that's very hard to process. When I told you that you shouldn't put up a table with a bunch of numbers up there because no one can process that, no one can read that. Well, he did that in an extreme form. But he was trying to make a point about the difficulty in processing a simple sequence and why we need to figure out what that sequence means now. So this is like a case of where you break the rules in a conscientious manner. So I broke my rule about not saying more than 3 things, because I can't give this presentation without telling you more than 3 things. But I'm not going to break the rule about putting the important things at the beginning and at the end. So please feel free to forget this and remember that. These are the important things that I want you to remember. And then I'll be happy to answer questions, but I'll leave out the important things for you to write down if you want. And that's what I have to say to you guys. I hope it's been useful.
Any questions?
Yeah.
Why did you use the blue faded background?
I just like it. It's I used to use just a black background, and I thought this was just a little kind of more stylish, and so I started playing around with it. It actually creates trouble because when you paste things on that have a black background, you can see that they're pasted on, because this is not really black. But it's just a style choice. What do you ask?
Because you said you should know everything.
Oh.
Why you do it in your presentation?
Yeah, there are some things. There are some things that where the answer can be trivial. I just like it. And
Also, like the top is black, so then when you put words up there and it's like black and then suddenly blue, it seems
Yeah.
like the top is just shorter than it really is.
oh, that's true.
Yeah.
It's weird because actually that is a function of this screen. In normal projectors, this doesn't look as pixelated or as cut out as it does. Yeah, that's a good point. Did anybody have-
Yeah, so like, how did you learn to do all of this?
You mean?
Like, I mean, there's a lot of criteria that you have here. Is this just kind of trial and error, what you figured out, and these are your guidelines?
Yeah,
or-
yeah. So I came up with these things by. I mean, I'm not lying to you when I say to you that I think this is important, and I've put a lot of effort into my own presentations and how to make them better. And I've looked at a lot of presentations. I've looked at many TED Talks. And there's Def Poetry Jam, which is a great resource for when you're looking for people who really know how to speak in public. So it's just a collection of things that I've done. And I was an OCT here for a few years. They asked me to put this thing together. And so putting this thing together meant reading a couple of books and doing all these things. It was just a lot of legwork. So I'm hoping that when I give this presentation, I'm like transferring all that hard work in an easy package to you guys that you can videotape and take what you want and leave obviously what you don't want. Hopefully, that is the purpose of what I'm doing here. I'm trying to do the legwork for you.
This is why we haven't come.
Yeah. Yeah.
When you talked about titles, I know, for example, in consulting, they're very strict about anytime you do a presentation, you must have a title and for every slide, and that title should be the main takeaway of the slide, and then it should progress. The story that you're talking about should progress from top to bottom. Is that something that? Why don't you like titles? Do you think that sometimes they're good, sometimes they're not? And is that whole top to bottom story flow that is used in consulting something that applies for the rest of presentations too, or not?
Yeah. So there are two things that I can say. The first one is that there is a limit to how much outside the box you can do. And there are places where it's not appropriate to go so much outside the box that people just concentrate on that. And consulting tends to be a very regimented place where they do things like that. So I think that if you tried to give a presentation, even if it was better than what they're doing already, then it would be kind of looked down upon. So I don't want to encourage you to break barriers because you think it's better, because it might actually hurt you. That being said, you can give a better presentation than that. Why does it, if you can give me an answer to, there has to be a title, if there's a good reason for that, then I will agree with you. And there are times when it might be true. But I don't think that's true in general. It's the same thing if I told you have to use Arial as a font. Well, sure, everybody in consulting does the same, everybody does it, that's the way things are. That's not a good reason. So I actually think that consultants are terrible speakers. Even though they've been selected to be very personal, and this makes me actually repeat something that Donna wanted me to say that I didn't say. Consultants tend to be people who are just pretty good speakers to begin with. They're personal, they're the guy who looks you in the eye, strong handshake. And they're selected like that. But then, because of that, they're pretty good at speaking, so they don't work at speaking. So they remain pretty good speakers forever. And they don't ever become great speakers. And I've gone to many presentations by consultants that are crap. And I even heard that people at McKinsey, they were selling this to us as if it were a great thing. We have people who make our presentations. You don't have to do all the typing things into PowerPoint. We have people who do that. All you do is quickly jot it down on a piece of paper. That's horrible. So someone controls the visuals while you do. That's retarded. What I'm saying is I totally disagree with that philosophy. But if you're going to be working within that philosophy, you can make things better. Make sure that your title is the takeaway message from your slide, and make sure that things flow in an orderly process, hopefully in a spatial way, in some form of way, from left to right, because that's what people are used to, or top to bottom. So in that sense, I agree. But they're shitty speakers. Sorry, that was a long-winded answer because yeah. All right, guys. Any other questions? No?
Why did you use a particular song for your stance motivation?
You can't not be motivated.
What?
You can't not be motivated from that.
That's
song.
true.
Yeah, it's true. I thought about Star Wars for a second, but then I thought, no, that's kind of malevolent rather than good. It was just because that the woman who did the study, she uses Wonder Woman, and I thought like, well, if I'm gonna be doing this, I hope I'm gonna be more like Superman than Wonder Woman. So like I thought, oh, the Superwoman. If I'm gonna be standing there like this, it'd be awkward if I just did that for 30 seconds with nothing. So maybe I should have some soundtrack. That would be kind of cool. It still feels. You have no idea how weird. And look at you, and like some of you are looking at me and like smiling, others are like looking away because you're embarrassed.
50-50.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you guys.